Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Fox 13 live Q&A tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait for a couple people to get on before we get started. I feel like I always have to recap a billion times as people are getting on, so we'll just wait for everybody to get on.
Well, I've got a good feeling about this chat because just before we came on, the Cubs won in extra innings. So I take that as a positive sign for this discussion this whole night. Also, and I might have to recap this later too, I don't normally sound this raspy. I've managed to go, 14 months in America at least without, catching COVID-19 just to catch a cold this last week. So, it's not a complaint, just a note of irony. It took a toll on my voice. You heard it in the story too. But I got some late night tea here and non-caffeine, and I'm gonna power through this.
Okay, good. That's what I like to hear. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I see a couple more people are jumping on. Hello to all of you. My name is Melanie Porter. I'm a web producer for Fox 13, and tonight I'm joined by Nate Carlisle, who is one of our amazing Fox 13 investigative reporters, producers, you name it, he does it.
Thank you.
And tonight we're going to talk about his report that actually just aired on Fox 13 Live at 9. If you didn't catch it, it'll be up on our website eventually tonight. I'll get it up. And the report investigated reasoning behind why the former Manaway police chief was fired. And Nate, there was a lot of conflicting views in your piece about why this happened. Can you just give everybody a recap if they may not have watched the full thing?
Yeah, not just conflicting views, but conflicting facts. So let's start with what the city has said via their documents they've released to me. This started with the mayor wanting to put the police chief, Michael Castro, on probation for a number of things, mostly having to do with failing to answer service calls or not enforcing ordinances. Parking ordinances were specifically mentioned in there, but there was perhaps one reference to speeding tickets as well. I'll talk about that. The letter pointed to a few instances where the chief was accused of failing to respond. One was supposedly a stalking call. The other was supposedly a suspicious vehicle call. And the complaints in that case were actually named, and I tracked them down. And they both said that the episodes were not what was articulated in the letter. The lady that supposedly made a stalking call says she never made a stalking call. She called a city employee asking how to report a suspicious vehicle. And after she did so, a police officer did follow up with her. And then as for the lady that did report a suspicious vehicle, she says the problem was really with the dispatcher who works in Brigham City through the sheriff's office. And the police did follow up with her in a timely manner. And both those supposed complainants were surprised to find their episodes in that letter and concerned that what occurred was being used to disparage Chief Castro. The letter also made reference that warnings should not be the rule, but rather the exception. And the word speeding was never used, but Chief Castro thinks that's a reference to his allowing his officers to issue warnings to speeders rather than issuing tickets. Manaway, I had the problem today earlier. Manaway sits on US 8991, and it's frankly notorious as a speed trap. The mayor, Michael Johnson, is also a former police chief there, and has been open about the fact that Manaway has relied on traffic offenses to fund its operations over the years. So Mayor Johnson went to put Chief Castro on probation. Chief Castro, reading this letter that would have effectively put him on probation, says, "This is not accurate. I'm not signing this." From there's some disagreement over exactly what happened, but both sides agree Chief Castro was fired. And there's some other allegations at that point that Chief Castro went on a tirade, screaming, yelling, that it was a pretty volatile situation, that at least one city employee thought it might turn violent, and she texted her husband a farewell note, according to the letter. Chief Castro admits he was agitated, but says it never got to that degree. And he thinks this is all about traffic tickets, that he wasn't writing as many traffic tickets as the mayor wanted. Chief Castro even says that he was told they had to come up with $110,000 in fines to fund a police department that had a $195,000 budget, so that'd be 3/5 of the city's budget. The police department budget. That's a lot. I've never heard of that in law enforcement before. Every city budgets some, at least minuscule amount for fines every year, but it's a minuscule amount relative to a city's budget. It's typically not seen as a main driver of a budget. So that's kind of where things stand at the moment. We should point out there's a state statute banning speeding ticket quotas, or tickets quotas of any kind, really. And Manaway was one of the reasons that bill passed back in 2018, that what was happening there aggravated a lot of people, including at the state legislature.
Yeah, so for people just hopping on, if you have any questions for Nate about his report that was just on air, be sure to leave them in the comments. I don't see any right now, but I know that some will roll in. So if we skipped yours or if I missed it, just put them in the comments. We'll try to get to them.
If you've gotten a speeding ticket in Manaway over the years, I'd love to hear from you too. I mean, what was your experience, and what do you think generally of the idea of funding a town on basically people that aren't even stopping there to shop? This isn't like a sales tax where at least, you're getting something in return, a good. This is a fine for people driving down the highway.
Okay, so Nate, I know you talked to a couple people from Manaway, and I just, Sophia says, sounds like Castro is lazy and disgruntled. When you talked to people in Manaway, what was their reaction to him being fired or let go?
Well, as I said, I reached out to the two people, citizens named in the letters, and they were surprised they were even in there. They didn't necessarily express an opinion on, the chief himself, but they thought what was in that letter was inaccurate. As for others in Manaway, I tried to speak with the mayor, tried to speak with city council, and they all declined. And look, I don't want to get in an argument with that lady that made that comment. I will say Chief Castro says he worked hard in town to improve the police department. He answered calls in the middle of the night, that sort of thing. Disgruntled, I guess that depends on your definition. He certainly doesn't like what transpired, and he thinks he has a case to make. But he thinks it's a legitimate case.
Okay, so Quinn asks, is there police in Manaway? Can you just talk a little bit about the police force that they have there and how it's different from, say, a police force in Salt Lake or somewhere?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you're talking about numbers. Where Salt Lake City, at least at one point, had like 400 officers. It was Chief Castro, one full-time sergeant, and then about a dozen part-timers. I mean, it was a relatively small department. This is a town of 1,000 people. So they didn't necessarily need that many or have that many, but they tried to provide 24-hour service, which is a big deal in any city, actually. It takes a lot for even bigger cities to have 24-hour police protection. And again, they relied on ticket revenue to do a lot of that. As for how many officers are there now, I don't know. I tried to find that out today, sent another email to the mayor, and he didn't respond. I don't know how many police officers are working in Manaway these days. If a real emergency happened, I guess the sheriff's office or even highway patrol could respond. But if you're talking about say a nonviolent offense, a burglary or something, you're probably gonna have to wait a long time at this point for an officer to take a report.
Okay, keep leaving your questions if you have anything in the comments. Nate, why didn't Manaway just explain from the start why it was firing Castro?
I am fighting a cold here, so that's why if I look like I'm choking something down, that's the deal. As for why they didn't explain this from the start, every city, that's not so unusual. Every city kind of worries about releasing too much information about what they call a personnel matter. There are some legal protections that for the employee, even the fired employee, that sometimes the employer can't discuss. On the other hand, there's in public record laws, in Utah, there's some certain things cities have to disclose. Termination letters are one of those. And so I put in a records request for the termination letter and any discipline letters, which would have included this probation letter. So that's how we got that. So basically, Manaway said what it had to say when it had to say it.
Great. Okay. Okay, so you talked a little bit about that that ticket bill that was put in place in 2018. How common is it for cities to rely on ticket revenue? I know I've been caught in in a few speed traps, and the tickets in the smaller towns always seem to be higher than they are normally.
If you've had that many, you can make that quantitative analysis. Huh?
No, I haven't, but you just kind of see things around. So
again, every city, to some extent, plans on receiving some ticket revenue, fine revenue. What's different about Manaway is the extent to which they relied upon it. I mean, some of my colleagues years ago did stories about they were funding like 30% of the town's operations or something like that on speeding tickets. That's practically unheard of. I mean, even just funding 3/5 of the police department on speeding tickets and parking tickets is pretty extraordinary. And that's what really separates Manaway, the volume that they seek to generate speeding tickets and traffic tickets, parking tickets too. Again, we're talking about probably people that don't even live there. So that separates it certainly from a property tax, which is the way a lot of cities finance their operations, or even a sales tax. I mean, sales tax. Yeah, you're going to get some out of towners, but they're getting something in it too. They're getting some goods. So it's really extraordinary that the way Manaway's gone about this over the decades.
Okay. Just trying to go through some of these, make sure we didn't miss anything. To people just jumping on, welcome to our little Q&A we're doing tonight. If you've got a question for Nate about his most recent report, you can leave it in the comments. I think I lost, there he is. I lost it for a second. Okay. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about this letter that we obtained? Can we go a little bit more in depth about what exactly was in that letter and why it was so controversial for Chief Castro?
Well, there's really two letters. First of all, the probation letter, and then the termination letter. And the probation letter was written first, and when Chief Castro wouldn't sign it, at that point he was terminated. So we'll start with the probation letter, and to understand what we're talking about. And this can happen in public employment, private employment too. Employers not happy with your job performance, and so they give you a set of expectations they want you to meet, and they give you a deadline to meet them. And if you can't meet them, then you're out of a job, or at least up for demotion or something. And that's what the mayor was trying to do in the case of Chief Castro. The issue here is that Chief Castro thought that what he was being accused of was not accurate. I talked about a couple of those cases. And I tracked down the lady citing the letter. She says she did not make a stalking complaint. The other lady says that It wasn't a problem with the police department. It was a problem with dispatch. And Chief Castro, there's other issues in the letter too. He's accused of failing to enforce parking ordinances, and there's a couple other things that Chief Castro thought he had explanations for, or just wasn't able to accomplish on the limited resources. And he's told to sign the letter. He doesn't want to sign the letter, and at that point, he devolves into shouting, and he's terminated. So then there's the termination letter as well, and he maintains there's some inaccuracies even in that the episode was not as hostile as the letter portrays. And he says that at one point he's accused of being so hostile that people were afraid for their safety apparently, but he says no, actually people were coming out in the hallway to see him off, to see him go away, and so that countermands the violence claims, or potential violence claims, I guess you should say.
Okay. Let's see what else we have here. So who is responsible for enforcing the statute banning ticket quotas?
Good question, because this came up in my conversations with Chief Castro. If you go to that state statute banning ticket quotas, it's only a couple paragraphs long. It's written in pretty plain English, really. It says municipalities cannot have quotas on tickets. I think it defines quota, and I think it defines police departments, stuff like that. But it doesn't put any consequences on this. In other words, some laws, they say if you break this law, it could be up to 6 months in jail, or up to 5 years in jail, whatever. There's nothing like that in this statute. It's not a criminal offense. It also doesn't specify any fines. It doesn't say which state agency can sue your city if you break this law. It doesn't even specify what recourse the public has if this law is broken. So in short, no one is tasked with enforcing this statute. I'm not an attorney, but I think this is what you would have to do if a citizen really wanted this enforced. You'd have to gather evidence that a city was putting ticket quotas on its officers, and then you'd have to take that evidence to a judge and ask a judge to issue an injunction to prevent this from happening. An injunction is basically an order from a judge saying you must stop this. So again, it's one of these laws. It's on the books. You're not supposed to do it, but it's difficult to enforce. I think you're muted, Melanie.
I did, because I'm having a hard time with the comments over here. But Nathan asks, is there any clue as to why Manaway felt it needed such an active police force?
Good name, Nathan. Why need an active police force? Two things. First of all, I think most towns aspire to have some level of police protection, and I think most of them would like someone on duty 24 hours a day. So Manaway is not that unusual in that regard. After that, ticket revenue, man. They've said for years that they rely on ticket revenue to fund services in the town. So if you're gonna write tickets, that means you need cops.
Okay, I'm gonna see if I have any more questions for you. Okay, so how much latitude do police have in choosing which laws to enforce?
This has kind of come up during the pandemic, hasn't it? That there's some latitude for police, and this is where I say, again, I'm not an attorney, but here's how it's been described to me over the years. So I'll just kind of report here. It's very case specific in terms of which law are we talking about. For example, Utah law specifies that if a police officer has probable cause of domestic violence, that the domestic violence suspect must be arrested or cited. That's in state law. It doesn't specify that a police officer, if he has probable cause that someone's speeding, has to write a speeding ticket. The officer can write a speeding ticket. That's within his or her powers as a law enforcement officer, but it's not mandated by state law. So child abuse, there's reporting mandates on child abuse, right? If a police officer suspects child abuse, he or she has to report that to somebody, or if not, investigate him or herself. But that's not, there's no similar requirement with parking tickets. So in the case of Manaway, the issue was the police chief was not comfortable, for a variety of reasons, telling his police officers they had to write speeding tickets or parking tickets. Pardon me. Whereas the mayor apparently thought that should be done, that you should have regular enforcement of Highway 8991, and tickets should be issued when you find someone speeding. And you can probably find a lot of people speeding on that stretch of 8991. It's 65 miles an hour, and you could easily maneuver a car 85, 90 miles an hour through there. And we're in a day and age where I-15 a few miles away is 80 miles an hour, so people are probably accustomed to that speed anyway.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions or comments in the chat. If anybody has anything else you want to ask Nate before we wrap up tonight,
I'd still love to hear from someone that actually got a speeding ticket through there one of these times. What they think of this whole thing, if they're comfortable with it, if they feel a little abused. Or people from other towns. I mean, do you want your cops writing speeding tickets to fund public services? Is that the sort of thing you want, or would you rather, just pay property and sales taxes?
Okay. Well, while we wrap up here, wait for any last minute comments that come in. Nate, is there anything else that you want to add or expand on to our Facebook viewers here?
I think just that Manaway is so unique in this state and the way it has gone about this. I've covered police in this state in one fashion or another for 15 years now, almost actually 16 years now. And you can find other speed traps in other towns, but they're not as fruitful or voluminous as Manaway. For example, I see a lot of I shouldn't say that. I've driven down I-15 through southern Utah, and I've seen some unmarked cop cars before in speed traps, but not always. And Manaway's got a reputation of always doing this, or until Chief Castro got there anyway.
Okay, so Cody says policing for profit should be illegal. So that's kind of an opinion to what you were asking for. Any other opinions or thoughts on this?
When you put it that way, this has come up in the context of social justice the last few years too. That cities, even if they don't plan on funding, a big chunk of their budget, are putting fines and citations disproportionately on poor people.
Okay. Okay, so Nathan, I always just like to preview the comments before I read them out loud.
Please.
So Nathan says, it's a town condoning the police to act like highwaymen. Why would I want police to use violations of the law to fund a city? I know I've already asked a question, but I dated a girl who got a ticket. I had to drive her to Manaway, and I paid her ticket. That seems like...
All that seems to be in past tense, Nathan.
Okay.
I don't know if there was a question there, but I
think you just had a comment there. Jackie says she's gotten a ticket there. It sounds like people have gotten tickets there that are watching. So definitely.
Statistically, if we had anybody at all, we probably got someone that got a ticket in Manaway, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Benji asks, why is it considered a speed trap if the speed limit is posted? Speeding is breaking the law, isn't it?
Okay, that's a very fair question, actually. I think it comes down to mostly, how often you do this. A lot of cities, they'll say, look, we're noticing too many people speeding through this area. So let's do a little enforcement to try to make the locals to slow down. And they'll, for one shift or a couple days or something, have officers slowing people down. You see this with highway patrols sometimes on I-15. I've noticed there'll be one spot for a shift or something like that, and then they'll you won't see them there the next day. Manaway had a reputation of being out there every day, and so it somewhat comes down to intent, that this wasn't just for public safety. This was to finance their town.
Okay. Well, with that, I am not seeing any other comments in here. Nate, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you to all of you Facebook viewers who also joined us tonight and had some good questions and comments for us to discuss. We had good discussion here tonight. Nate's full report and web story will be available on our website, Fox 13 Now, shortly. And yes, if you have any other stories about Manaway tickets or any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the Facebook chat or tweet Nate or whatever. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Nate, before we wrap up?
Just thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for your questions and comments. And we're taking story ideas all the time. If something you think we ought to investigate, reach out to us. Send us an email. Send us a Facebook message, something like that.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.